I maxed out my credit card to help cover my dad's urgent medical treatment, thinking family came first and every dollar was worth it. But just a few days later, I stumbled across photos of my sister on social media, smiling and carefree, sipping cocktails on a sunny beach vacation with her friends. While I was drowning in debt to save our father's life, she was living it up without a care in the world. My name is Amber Harris, and my entire world came crashing down when I discovered my sister was living it up on a luxury Hawaiian vacation, all thanks to my credit card, the one I'd given my mom to save our dad's life. Seriously, the audacity. Just last month, it felt like a bomb exploded in our family. My dad, the most amazing man I know, was diagnosed with a serious heart condition. My mom, her eyes red and swollen from crying, begged me for my gold credit card. It was for his specialized treatment, she said. Without a second thought, I handed it over. How could I not? It was Dad. A week later, I was scrolling through Instagram, just minding my own business, and then I froze. There she was. My sister, Heather, lounging on a beach in Hawaii, a tropical drink in her hand. My blood ran cold. When I finally confronted her, she just smiled, that casual, entitled smirk, and said, "Thanks to your credit card. But don't worry, I only used $100,000. I literally laughed. It was a nervous, disbelieving laugh. My card has only $100 on it. I told her, the words tasting like ash. Did you even check the name? Let me rewind a bit, so you understand how we got to that moment, because believe me, it's a story. I've always been the responsible one in my family, the one who tried to hold everything together. After graduating from Boston University with a marketing degree, I really struggled. I spent nearly a year working retail, sending out what felt like a million resumes. Boston's marketing scene? Brutal. But finally, I landed it, an entry-level position at Meridian Marketing, one of the most prestigious firms in the city. For the past 5 years, I've worked myself to the bone. Seriously, midnight at the office? Been there. Taking on the projects nobody else wanted. Done that. I built my reputation, client by client, with grit and determination. Just 2 months ago, I was promoted to senior marketing strategist, and it came with a substantial pay raise. Throughout all these years, I've also built excellent credit. I remember the day I qualified for that gold card. It felt like a tangible symbol of my financial responsibility, you know? Unlike so many of my colleagues who would immediately max out their limits on designer clothes or wild vacation packages, I maintained a strict budget. I've always been super careful, only transferring money to my card when I needed it for specific purchases, keeping just a minimal balance otherwise. This habit actually started after my identity was nearly stolen in college. It made me paranoid about financial security, and honestly it saved me more than once. Now my dad, Thomas Harris, he's everything to me. He taught high school history for 35 years in our hometown of Worcester, Massachusetts. He's that kind of teacher, the one former students still stop to thank, decades later. My dad raised me with such clear values about money and honesty. Money comes and goes, he'd always say. But your integrity, once lost, is hard to recover. Every single Sunday growing up, he'd sit with me at our kitchen table, patiently explaining concepts like compound interest, emergency funds, and the difference between needs and wants. When I got my very first paycheck from a summer job at 16, he helped me open a savings account and taught me to save 20% of everything I earned. He was my rock, my moral compass. My mother, Catherine, on the other hand, well, she's always had a complicated relationship with money. She grew up in relative poverty and, because of it, developed this intense obsession with appearances. Our home always had to have the newest furniture, even if it meant maxing out credit cards. She leased new cars every 2 years, always trying to keep up with the Joneses, as Dad would say with a sigh. When I was in high school, I discovered she had secretly opened a credit card in Dad's name that he knew absolutely nothing about, with a balance of over $15,000. Dad, bless his forgiving heart, let it go after she promised to attend financial counseling. But I noticed the pattern continued, just more discreetly. Then there's my sister, Heather. She's 25, and she's never held a job for more than 3 months. She majored in communication at a private college that literally drained my parents' savings, only to drop out in her senior year because she wasn't feeling it anymore. Since then, she's lived in my parents' basement, occasionally mentioning vague business ideas that, predictably, never materialize. Heather has always been Mom's favorite. They shared the same love for luxury and appearances. Growing up, Heather would constantly borrow my clothes without asking, and predictably, return them stained or damaged. When I complained to our parents, Mom would tell me I was being selfish, while Dad would try to mediate, usually unsuccessfully. It was a pattern. The family financial situation had really deteriorated in recent years. Dad's teaching pension wasn't as substantial as they had hoped, and Mom's sporadic work as a real estate agent just wasn't bringing in consistent income. Their retirement savings had been depleted by poor investment choices Mom had made without consulting Dad, plus the outrageous cost of Heather's unfinished education. I knew they were struggling, but I genuinely didn't realize how bad it was until Dad's diagnosis. It happened so suddenly. Dad had been experiencing shortness of breath for weeks, but typical Dad dismissed it as just getting older. But then, he nearly collapsed while mowing the lawn. That's when Mom finally convinced him to see a doctor. The diagnosis was severe aortic stenosis, complicated by an irregular heartbeat. He needed a specialized procedure that wasn't fully covered by their insurance. The cardiologist recommended a particular specialist in Boston who had pioneering techniques but, of course, didn't accept their insurance plan. The estimated cost for everything would be around $75,000. My heart just sank. 3 weeks ago, Mom showed up at my apartment unannounced. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying, and she clutched a folder full of medical paperwork. "Amber, I don't know what to do," she sobbed as I made her tea, trying to be strong for her. "The doctor says if your father doesn't get this procedure within the next month, he could..." She couldn't finish the sentence. I sat beside her on my sofa, scanning the medical documents with growing concern. "Have you checked if there are other specialists who accept your insurance?" I asked, trying to find a loophole. "We've tried everything," she insisted. "This Dr. Reynolds is the only one with the success rate your father needs for his particular condition." She placed her hand on mine, her grip tight. "Amber, I hate to ask this, but is there any way you could help? Just temporarily? We've applied for a medical loan, but it won't come through for at least 2 months." I hesitated. Memories of previous broken promises flashed through my mind. When I was saving for my first apartment, Mom had borrowed $3,000 for what she called essential house repairs. It turned out to be a kitchen renovation they couldn't afford. It took over a year to get that money back, and only after multiple uncomfortable conversations. "I don't have that kind of cash available, Mom," I said honestly, already knowing her next move. "What about your gold card?" she asked, her eyes brightening with a terrifying hope. "The one you mentioned has a high limit? Just until the loan comes through, I swear we'll pay back every penny." I walked to my bedroom, sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the gold card in my wallet. This was for Dad. Not for Mom's impulsive spending, not for Heather's latest whim. This was literally life or death. When I returned to the living room, I held out the card. "This is only for Dad's medical expenses," I said firmly. "I need receipts for everything." "Of course, sweetheart," Mom said, clutching the card like a lifeline. "I'll keep track of every dollar. Thank you for saving your father." She hugged me tightly, and despite all my reservations, I felt a flicker of goodness, knowing I could help Dad when he needed it most. As she was leaving, I added, "Mom, remember, the card has a high limit, but I transfer money to it only when needed. Call me before any charges so I can move funds accordingly." "Don't worry, we'll coordinate everything," she promised, wiping away tears of gratitude. "You're such a blessing, Amber." I watched her drive away with a mixture of hope and unease. Little did I know that this single act of love would unravel our family in ways I couldn't even begin to imagine. The first few days after giving Mom my card seemed normal enough. She sent text messages with vague updates about appointments being scheduled and consultations with Dr. Reynolds. "Your father is being so brave," one message read. "The doctor says we caught it just in time." I was in the middle of the biggest project of my career at Meridian Marketing, rebranding a major financial institution. If successful, it could double our agency's revenue. My days stretched into nights at the office. We were ordering takeout with my team, falling asleep on a small sofa in our conference room, only to wake up and continue working. I barely had time to check my personal emails, let alone visit my parents, who lived an hour away. On the 5th day after giving Mom my card, I called Dad during my lunch break. "How are you feeling?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Mom says the new doctor is optimistic. There was a pause on the line. "What new doctor?" he asked, confusion evident in his voice. "I've only seen Dr. Mitchell, same as always." My stomach tightened. "Aren't you scheduled with a specialist in Boston? Dr. Reynolds?" "First time hearing of it," Dad said, sounding genuinely perplexed. "Catherine mentioned something about looking into additional options, but we haven't made any decisions yet." I quickly changed the subject, not wanting to worry him, but a seed of doubt had been planted. A cold, heavy seed. That evening, despite my exhaustion, I decided to check social media before bed, something I rarely had time for during big projects. The first post on my Instagram feed made my blood run cold. It was Heather, my sister, posing on a beach with a tropical drink in hand. The caption read, "Surprise vacation! Sometimes you just need to treat yourself. #Hawaii, #luxury life, #blessed." The timestamp showed it was posted earlier that day. My first thought was rational, or at least I tried to make it rational. Perhaps she had saved up for this trip, or maybe she was there with a new boyfriend who was covering expenses. Heather had always found ways to enjoy luxuries despite her lack of steady income. But as I scrolled further, more photos appeared. Heather checking into the Grand Wailea Resort, one of the most expensive hotels in Maui. Heather shopping at high-end boutiques, bags from Gucci and Prada visible in the photos. Heather dining at a restaurant I recognized from a travel magazine as having $200 tasting menus. My heart raced. I called my mother. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. I texted, "Need to talk about Dad's treatment. Call me ASAP." No response came that night. The next morning, I called Dad again. "Has Mom been home this week?" I asked as casually as possible. "She's been in and out," he replied. "Said she's been meeting with financial advisors about medical payments." "Why do you ask?" "Just checking in," I said, not wanting to stress him. "How about Heather? Is she around?" "She mentioned something about a trip with friends, to be honest. I haven't seen much of either of them lately. I've been resting a lot." After hanging up, I called Dad's cardiologist, Dr. Mitchell, claiming I needed information for insurance purposes. The receptionist confirmed what I feared. "We haven't scheduled any new treatments or referred Mr. Harris to any specialists recently. His next regular appointment is in 2 weeks." I spent my lunch break diving deeper into Heather's social media. The timeline became sickeningly clear. She had left for Hawaii the day after Mom got my credit card. Her post tagged friends I didn't recognize and mentioned a week-long stay at one of the island's most exclusive resorts. One photo showed her parasailing with the caption, "Always wanted to try this. Living my best life." In desperation, I called Janet, my parents' neighbor and Mom's close friend. "Janet, this is awkward, but have you seen my mom lately? I've been trying to reach her about Dad." "Oh, Catherine mentioned she'd be hard to reach," Janet said cheerfully. "She's helping Heather with that surprise vacation. So thoughtful of them to arrange such a nice trip." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. My card wasn't being used for Dad's life-saving treatment. It was funding Heather's luxury vacation in Hawaii. The realization hit me physically, making me rush to the bathroom where I threw up my lunch. Back at my desk, I called the credit card company, but without knowing specific charges, they could only confirm that the card was indeed being used and approaching its limit. That evening, I couldn't concentrate on work. I left early, ignoring concerned looks from my colleagues. In my apartment, I paced back and forth, alternating between rage and disbelief. How could they do this? How could Mom prioritize Heather's vacation over Dad's health? And how could Heather accept such an extravagant gift, knowing where the money was supposed to go? I broke down, sobbing on my kitchen floor, feeling utterly betrayed by the people I should have been able to trust most in the world. Through my tears, I made a decision. I would confront them directly when they returned, with evidence in hand. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about a fundamental breach of trust, an exploitation of my love for my father. Over the next 2 days, I documented everything: screenshots of Heather's posts, records of my conversations with Dad's doctor, the text messages from Mom about fictional appointments. I couldn't eat or sleep properly, constantly checking my phone for credit card alerts. Each new charge notification felt like another stab of betrayal. Finally, a week after giving Mom my card, I received a text. "We'll be home tomorrow. Good news about your father's treatment options. Can't wait to tell you everything." The sheer audacity of the lie only strengthened my resolve. Tomorrow, they would have to face what they had done. I rehearsed what I would say dozens of times during my drive to Worcester. Should I start with understanding and give them a chance to confess? Or should I lay out the evidence immediately? My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The folder of printed screenshots and credit card statements sat on the passenger seat like a ticking bomb. It was dinner time when I arrived unannounced at my parents' house. Through the dining room window, I could see the three of them sitting around the table. Mom was serving what looked like a celebration dinner. The good china was out, candles were lit, and a bottle of expensive champagne stood open. Dad looked tired but was smiling as Heather animatedly told a story, her hands gesturing wildly. I stood frozen on the porch for a moment, taking in this bizarre scene. Dad still looked ill, his face was pale, and he moved gingerly when reaching for his water glass. Whatever treatment Mom had claimed to be arranging clearly hadn't happened. When I rang the doorbell, Mom answered with a surprised expression that quickly shifted to nervous enthusiasm. "Amber! What a wonderful surprise! We were just about to call you with the good news." She ushered me inside. Heather's smile faltered slightly when she saw me, but she quickly recovered. "Hey sis! Perfect timing! I was just telling Dad about the amazing sunrise I saw from the hotel balcony." Dad looked genuinely happy to see me. "Amber, you shouldn't work so hard, you look exhausted. Come sit down and have some dinner." I took a seat, accepting the plate Mom hurriedly prepared for me. The tension inside me was building, but I decided to play along temporarily, curious how far they would take this charade. "So, what's the good news about Dad's treatment?" I asked, looking directly at Mom. "Oh yes," she brightened. "Dr. Reynolds thinks your father is an excellent candidate for the new procedure. We've scheduled it for next month, and he's very optimistic about the outcome." Dad looked confused. "Dr. Reynolds? Is that the specialist you mentioned, Catherine? You didn't tell me anything was scheduled." Mom's smile tightened. "I was waiting until it was confirmed, dear. I didn't want to get your hopes up prematurely." I took a sip of water, buying time to control my anger. "That's interesting," I said. "When I called Dr. Mitchell earlier this week, his office wasn't aware of any referrals to specialists." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Mom laughed nervously. "Oh, there must be some miscommunication. These medical offices can be so disorganized with their paperwork." "Heather," I said, turning to my sister, who was suddenly very interested in her mashed potatoes. "How was Hawaii? The Grand Wailea Resort looks beautiful in your photos." She brightened instantly, oblivious to the tension. "It was amazing. The spa treatments alone were worth the trip, and the shopping. I found this gorgeous Gucci bag that was the last one in stock." "Sounds expensive," I commented, my voice flat. "Where did you get the money for all that? Last I heard, you were between jobs." Heather exchanged a quick glance with Mom, who gave a slight nod. "Well," Heather said with a smirk, "I was going to tell you eventually. Mom thought it would be better coming from me." She reached for her wine glass. "I used your credit card. But don't worry, I only used around $100,000. There's still plenty of limit left for Dad's procedure." The casual way she admitted to stealing from me, and the implied assumption that I would be okay with it, left me momentarily speechless. Dad's fork clattered onto his plate. "You did what?" he asked, looking between Heather and Mom. Mom jumped in quickly. "Now, Thomas, don't get upset. It's not good for your heart. Amber agreed to help with medical expenses, and we will use the card for that too. But Heather has been so stressed lately, and the doctor said a vacation would be the perfect thing for her anxiety." "What doctor?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Dr. Feldman, my therapist," Heather said defensively. "He said I was on the verge of a breakdown from the pressure of figuring out my career path." I opened my folder and placed Heather's Instagram posts on the table. "So, instead of using my card for Dad's life-saving treatment, as promised, you took my sister on a luxury vacation to Hawaii?" "Now, Amber," Mom said in her placating voice, "you're making it sound so black and white. We'll use the rest for your father later. The medical loan is still being processed, and Heather really needed this break. You have a stable job and a good income. Can't you be happy for your sister?" Dad was looking through the printed photos, his expression changing from confusion to hurt, to then, raw anger. "Catherine, you told me you were arranging medical consultations these past days. Were you actually in Hawaii with Heather? I was handling both, Mom insisted. I was making calls about your treatment while Heather enjoyed the resort. Multitasking. The situation was escalating quickly. Mom called her sister, my Aunt Paula, who lived nearby, apparently hoping for reinforcement. When Aunt Paula arrived and heard what happened, she surprisingly took my side. Catherine, this is beyond the pale, she said, shaking her head. Using money meant for Thomas's heart condition to send Heather to Hawaii? What were you thinking? You don't understand, Mom said defensively. Amber can afford it. She's always been selfish with her money. Selfish? I repeated, my voice rising. I gave you my credit card because I thought Dad might die without treatment. How is that selfish? Heather rolled her eyes. You're being so dramatic. It's just money. You can make more. That's when Dad spoke up, his voice quiet but firm. This isn't the first time, is it, Catherine? You've done similar things before. Mom's face paled. I don't know what you mean. The missing retirement funds from last year that you said were lost in a market downturn? The second mortgage on the house that appeared mysteriously? The credit card in my name I never applied for? Dad looked heartbroken. Where did all that money go? Mom had no answer, but her eyes darted briefly to Heather, who was suddenly very interested in her nails. The confrontation continued for hours. Mom cycled through various tactics: justification, minimization, deflection, and finally, tearful apologies that seemed more about getting caught than actual remorse. Heather alternated between defiance and playing the victim. Other family members called and took different sides, some saying I should forgive and forget because family, others appalled by the betrayal. Through it all, I remained calmer than I expected, letting them talk themselves into deeper trouble with each new justification. When Mom claimed she'd always intended to pay me back with her next real estate commission, Aunt Paula reminded everyone that Mom hadn't sold a house in over 2 years. When Heather insisted she needed the vacation for her mental health, Uncle Robert asked why a local spa day wouldn't have sufficed. Eventually, when they had run out of excuses, I spoke. I think it's time I showed you something else, I said, pulling out my phone and opening my banking app. That's interesting, I said calmly, looking directly at Heather. Because my card only has a $100 limit unless I transfer funds to it. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom's face strained of color, and Heather's jaw literally dropped open. Dad looked confused, then the realization dawned on his face, followed by something I hadn't seen often, a small, vindicating smile. What do you mean, $100 limit? Heather finally stammered. The charges went through. I bought first-class tickets. I stayed in a luxury suite. I held up my phone, showing my banking app. After my identity was nearly stolen in college, I developed a habit. I keep my cards at a minimum limit and transfer money only when I'm about to make a purchase. It's a security measure. But, Mom was struggling to comprehend. How did the charges go through then? They haven't, I explained. They're pending authorization. Credit card companies often approve charges temporarily, especially for trusted merchants like airlines and hotels. But within 24 to 72 hours, if the funds aren't there, the charges are reversed and reported as fraud. Heather's face contorted as the implications sank in. So all those purchases were never actually approved? I finished for her. And since I never authorized you to use my card, and it was obtained under false pretenses. I let this sentence hang in the air. Heather suddenly rushed to the bathroom, the sound of retching following shortly after. Mom collapsed into a chair, her carefully constructed deception crumbling around her. Dad reached over and squeezed my hand. You knew all along? He asked, his voice full of wonder. Not all along, I admitted. But I became suspicious almost immediately. When I confirmed what was happening, I called the credit card company to alert them, but decided to let this play out a bit. Mom returned from checking on Heather, her face ashen. We have to fix this, Amber. You have to transfer the money to cover the charges. I looked at her incredulously. Are you serious right now? You lied to me, stole my credit card, and used it fraudulently, and your solution is for me to pay for it anyway? But Heather will be in so much trouble, Mom wailed. They'll call it credit card fraud. It is credit card fraud, Dad said firmly, surprising us both. Catherine, do you understand what you've done? You could have cost Amber her financial reputation, not to mention stolen from her. Mom switched tactics, tears flowing freely now. Amber, sweetie, I'm your mother. I've given everything for you. You can't let this happen to your sister and me. We're family. For a moment, I felt the familiar pull of guilt and obligation that had defined our relationship for years. But something had fundamentally changed inside me. The manipulation wasn't working anymore. I pulled out my phone again and dialed the credit card company's fraud department, putting it on speaker. Hello, this is Amber Harris. I'm calling about my gold card ending in 4735. Mom lunged for the phone, but Dad caught her arm, shaking his head firmly. Yes, I said into the phone. I'd like to confirm that those charges from Hawaii were not authorized by me. My card was taken under false pretenses and used fraudulently. I looked directly at Mom as I spoke. I can provide all details necessary for your investigation. After finishing the call, I gathered my things to leave. Mom was sobbing on the couch while Heather had emerged from the bathroom, her mascara streaked down her face. You can't just leave, Heather shouted. You have to fix this. They said the hotel might press charges if the payment doesn't clear. You're 25 years old, Heather, I said tiredly. It's time you faced consequences for your actions. But I could go to jail, she shrieked. You should have thought about that before stealing $100,000. Mom tried one last tactic. If you walk out that door, you're no longer part of this family. Dad stood up shakily. No, Catherine. If Amber walks out that door, it's because you and Heather pushed her out with your actions. And if that happens, I'll be walking out right behind her. I left the house with those words hanging in the air, Dad's support giving me strength I didn't know I needed. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of emotions, relief at having confronted them, vindication that the fraud wouldn't impact my finances, but also deep grief for the family relationships that might never be the same. That night, alone in my apartment, I alternated between crying and feeling a strange sense of liberation. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from Mom and Heather, ranging from desperate apologies to thinly veiled threats about family abandonment. I silenced the notifications and tried to sleep. Around midnight, my phone rang with Dad's ringtone. I answered immediately, worried about his health. Dad, are you okay? I'm fine, physically at least, he said, his voice tired but clear. I just wanted you to know that I'm proud of you, Amber. What you did today took courage. His words unleashed fresh tears. I didn't want it to be this way. I know, sweetheart. Neither did I. But sometimes the truth needs to come out for healing to begin. What Catherine and Heather did was wrong, and they need to understand that. We talked for nearly an hour, Dad sharing his own realizations about the patterns of behavior he had enabled over the years. Before hanging up, he promised to see his doctor about legitimate treatment options that their insurance would cover. I love you, Amber, he said. Never doubt that. I love you too, Dad. After we hung up, I fell into the first peaceful sleep I'd had in weeks, knowing that whatever happened next, I had done the right thing. The credit card company's investigation began immediately. A fraud specialist named Marcus contacted me the next day for a detailed statement. I provided everything, the text messages from Mom about Dad's fictional medical treatment, screenshots of Heather's Instagram posts, and a timeline of events. Unfortunately, Miss Harris, this happens more often than you might think, Marcus told me. Family fraud is actually quite common, and it's usually the hardest for victims to report. Will charges be pressed automatically? I asked, still conflicted about the potential legal consequences for my sister and mother. That depends on several factors. The credit card company will certainly pursue recovery of any funds that were actually spent. As for criminal charges, that's typically up to the cardholder, whether to press charges. However, the merchants involved, especially for large purchases, may pursue their own fraud cases. The reality of the situation hit Heather hard and fast. The day after our confrontation, she called me in a panic. The hotel is saying I need to pay them $24,000 immediately, or they're calling the police. Her voice was shrill with fear. Amber, you have to help me. I can't, Heather. I don't have $24,000 to give you, and even if I did, that wouldn't solve the problem. What about all the other charges? I'm trying to return some of the things I bought, she said desperately. But the stores are saying items like the Gucci bag were final sale. I felt a twinge of sympathy, despite everything. Heather, I think you need to talk to a lawyer. A lawyer? I can't afford a lawyer. That's the whole problem. The irony of her statement wasn't lost on me. There are legal aid services that might be able to help, but Heather, you need to understand the seriousness of what happened here. I know, she said quickly. I made a terrible mistake. But you're my sister. You can't let me go to jail. This isn't about me letting anything happen, I replied. This is about the choices you made. After hanging up, I received a barrage of voicemails from Mom, each more desperate than the last. The first few were tearful apologies. Amber, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I never meant for things to go this far. Please call me back so we can fix this together. By the afternoon, the tone had shifted. Amber Harris, I am your mother, and you will not destroy this family with your stubbornness. If you don't help your sister, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. And by evening, I've spoken to your Aunt Linda, and she agrees you're being unnecessarily cruel. Family helps family, Amber. Your father is devastated by your behavior. That last claim prompted me to call Dad directly. He answered on the first ring. Don't believe everything your mother says, he told me wearily. I'm not devastated by your behavior. I'm devastated by the situation. The extended family quickly divided into factions. My mother's siblings largely took her side, flooding my inbox with messages about forgiveness and family loyalty. Dad's side of the family, particularly Aunt Paula and Uncle Robert, supported my decision to report the fraud, with Aunt Paula even offering to let me stay with her if I needed space from the situation. The stress began affecting my work performance. During an important client presentation, I completely lost my train of thought and stood frozen before the boardroom for what felt like an eternity. My boss, Diane, pulled me aside afterward. Amber, this isn't like you. Is everything okay? I broke down and told her a condensed version of what was happening. To my surprise, she was incredibly supportive. Take the rest of the week off, she insisted. This project is important, but your well-being matters more. We can reschedule the follow-up meeting. Meanwhile, Dad's health was deteriorating from the stress. He called to tell me he'd had a minor episode that sent him back to the hospital for observation. The doctor says the emotional strain isn't helping my condition, he admitted. But don't blame yourself, Amber. This isn't your fault. But I couldn't help feeling guilty. If I hadn't exposed the fraud, would Dad be doing better? The rational part of me knew that the deception would have been revealed eventually, probably in an even more catastrophic way, but the emotional weight was still crushing. Heather's situation worsened when she learned she might face actual criminal charges. The credit card company had referred the case to their legal department, and because of the amount involved, nearly $100,000, it was being taken very seriously. They're saying it could be grand larceny, she sobbed over the phone. I could get up to 15 years in prison. Amber, please, you have to tell them you authorized me to use the card. I can't lie, Heather. That would make me complicit in fraud. But it's just a statement. Just say you changed your mind about pressing charges. It doesn't work that way. There's documented evidence that I never gave permission, and that the card was obtained under false pretenses. Mom's attempts to manipulate Dad against me intensified. She convinced him to move into their bedroom downstairs because climbing stairs was becoming difficult for him. Then she limited his phone access, claiming he needed rest without disturbances. It took me 3 days to realize she was screening his calls, only letting him talk to family members who sided with her and Heather. When I finally got through to him by calling from a different number, Dad sounded exhausted. Your mother is making this very difficult, Amber. She's convinced that if you just cooperate, everything will go back to normal. I've tried explaining that normal wasn't working for us anyway, but she doesn't want to hear it. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Winters, to help process the complex emotions I was experiencing. During our first session, I broke down completely. I feel like I've destroyed my family, I admitted through tears. From what you've described, Dr. Winters said gently, your family was already in trouble. Your mother and sister's actions revealed existing problems. You didn't create them. But if I had just let it go, then what message would that have sent? That it's okay to lie to you? That your boundaries don't matter? That your sister's vacation was more important than your father's health? Over the following weeks, Dr. Winters helped me understand the dysfunctional family dynamics I'd been entrenched in for years. We identified patterns of enabling behavior, emotional manipulation, and the uneven distribution of respect and responsibility between Heather and me. What you're describing, she explained, is fairly classic family roles. You've been cast as the responsible one, the fixer, while your sister has been allowed to remain in a perpetual state of dependence. Your mother enables this dynamic, and your father, while loving, has been somewhat passive in challenging it. The insight was painful, but illuminating. I began to see how my own behaviors, always coming to the rescue, never setting firm boundaries, had contributed to the situation. Meanwhile, the legal situation continued to evolve. The hotel in Hawaii had filed a formal complaint about the fraudulent payment. 2 luxury boutiques were pursuing charges for the unpaid merchandise. The credit card company's investigation was concluding, and they were preparing to make a decision about criminal referrals. 40 days after the confrontation, I faced a critical decision point. The credit card company's fraud department called to ask if I wanted to press charges against my mother and sister. If I declined, they would still pursue recovery of funds, but might not refer the case for criminal prosecution. Miss Harris, the fraud investigator said, this is ultimately your decision. There's no right or wrong answer here. But I should inform you that declining to press charges doesn't erase the fraud that occurred, and the merchants involved may still pursue their own legal action. I sat in my apartment that evening, weighing the heaviest decision of my life. Could I live with myself if Heather went to jail? Could I live with myself if I let her escape all consequences? What about Mom? What about Dad's declining health? As I contemplated these questions, my phone rang. It was Dad calling from Aunt Paula's house, where he had temporarily moved to reduce the stress at home. Amber, he said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. Whatever you decide tomorrow, I want you to know I support you. You've always been my rock, and I'm sorry I didn't protect you more from the patterns in our family. His words gave me the clarity I needed to make my decision. 3 days after my conversation with Dad, he was hospitalized again. His cardiologist called me directly this time. Ms. Harris, your father's condition has deteriorated significantly. The emotional stress has accelerated his symptoms, and we need to move forward with treatment immediately. The procedure we discussed earlier is now urgent. What's the timeline? I asked, my hand shaking as I held the phone. Days, not weeks. And I have to be honest, without intervention, his prognosis is not good. I thanked the doctor and immediately called the hospital's billing department to discuss payment options. The procedure would cost approximately $68,000 after insurance. They offered a payment plan but required a substantial down payment that I didn't have immediately available without liquidating my emergency fund and retirement account, which would incur significant penalties. Within an hour of that call, Mom showed up at my apartment, looking haggard but determined. I know you're still angry with me, she said when I reluctantly let her in. But this is about your father now. The doctor says he needs the procedure immediately, and we need your financial help. I'm already working with the hospital on payment options, I said, maintaining my distance. But they want a large down payment right away, Mom pressed. If you would just drop the fraud charges, we could work something out with the credit card company. Maybe they would extend your limit temporarily for a medical emergency? I stared at her in disbelief. You're still trying to manipulate the situation? Dad could die, and you're focused on getting Heather out of trouble? That's not fair, Mom protested, though her eyes darted away from mine. I'm thinking about your father, but yes, I'm also thinking about your sister. She's facing criminal charges, Amber. Our family is falling apart, and you have the power to fix it. I didn't break our family, Mom. You and Heather did that when you stole my card and lied about Dad's treatment. Mom collapsed onto my sofa, finally showing genuine emotion. I know what we did was wrong. I've always protected Heather too much, given her things I couldn't afford, shielded her from consequences. But I never thought it would go this far. She looked up at me, her eyes red. I was so focused on giving Heather the life I never had that I lost sight of what really matters. It was the first honest thing she'd said since this began, but I remained cautious. Dad needs treatment, and I'll make sure he gets it. But I'm not going through you to do it. I spent the next day researching every possible option for financing Dad's procedure. I spoke